what we try to do is we try to take sort of a biblical worldview and also through the prophetic scriptures and look at what's going on in the world today and see if this relates to some of the things that are prophesied will happen in the end times. And my conclusion is I think we do live in the end times. How long this is going to last, I don't know. We live in a world where if you take all of these different events of Bible prophecy, they seem to be converging. They all seem to be on the table at the same time. And my view is that as we get closer, the ultimate event is the second coming of Jesus Christ. And all of these events converge and get closer and closer. And as they get closer and closer, my view is that it's almost like the vortex of a tornado. It's very turbulent and that type of thing. And I think we really, when you look around, I think you have to conclude that we live in a very disrupted world, and we live in what seems to be chaos, particularly in geopolitics and culture and that type of thing. Things that I've never thought we would see before. One of the verses I refer to a lot is 2 Timothy chapter 4, and I always point out that Paul wrote this when he was near the end of his life. It was the last thing he wrote. And I did a series one time called Famous Last Words, because usually when you don't have any time left, and you know you don't have much time left, you're pretty careful about what you say, and you tell what's important. So in the last chapter of Scripture that Paul ever wrote, we have this: for the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine. And so when you see these verses, look and see if they have any application to today. But after their own lust shall they heap to themselves teachers having itching ears, and they shall turn away their ears from the truth and shall be turned unto fables. And this is something that we see happening in culture all the time now. People believe in nonsense. Whether it's global warming, now called climate change, and that sort of thing. And listen, I have very conservative political views, so that should become apparent to you. It's kind of hard to hide that. And if that's offensive to you, I don't care. I mean, okay. So, you know, and I've been to Boulder, so I know what Boulder is like. And one of my professors from graduate school ended up as head of the sociology department at University of Colorado till I think he's retired now. But he was a left wing. He used to make in graduate school back in the 70s. He made me read this stupid Marxist stuff. And I told him, I said, you know, Bob, deep down you know this stuff is nonsense, and I'll give you the answer you want, but don't make me read that garbage anymore, or I'll just won't take you for class. And but people believe in fables. One of the big fables now, and you see this all the time, is that sexual orientation is fixed. If you're born gay, you can never be changed. There was a politician, the education minister in Israel, got himself in a big heap of trouble and was essentially being steamrolled out of public life because he said he believed that you could change your sexual orientation. And so if we live in a world where sexual orientation is fixed and can't be changed, but your gender can. That's what, and people believe that. And so this is what they believe: they shall be turned unto fables. Now this will happen in the church too, and we see a rise of mysticism in the church. So just a little, I love license plates and bumper stickers. And I saw this on a Tesla yesterday on Kipling Road down in Wheat Ridge. I emit zero. Now listen, Teslas are very expensive, but this guy, can we be blunt? This guy is a moron. Because does he not realize that the electricity that he uses to recharge his Tesla comes from a power plant, and that there were a lot of factories and manufacturing and metal, steel, all this went in, and all of that he probably has a bigger carbon footprint than a lot of us. So I also love the bumper stickers. This is just an aside. Have you ever seen the bumper stickers 13.1? 26.2. You don't see them out here? By the way, I've noticed out here in Colorado, you have incredible number of bike lanes. I have not seen a person riding in a bike in the bike lane yet in 4 days.
Nor has anybody in Colorado.
No, okay. But they have these 13 point, if look around sometime, you'll see 13.1, 26.2 stickers on the back of cars. And what are those? It means I ran a half marathon, 13.1 miles. I ran a marathon, 26.2 miles. Now my nephew has they got married a couple years ago, and I saw on her Facebook that she was a runner. So I asked her, Christy, are you a runner? Oh, yeah. I said, Christy, do you have a 13.1 sticker on the back of your car? And she got kind of red, and she goes, yeah. And I said, well, let me tell you about that. When the food apocalypse comes, I know where all you 13.1 and 26.2 people live, and I'm going to last. I'm a food camel, okay? I'll last all of you, and I'm going to come and get your stuff. So Patty sent me this. I didn't grab the PDF of it, but Colorado State University, they've kind of fallen for it too on this gender neutral stuff. It's insanity. It's hard to believe that people believe these fables and this nonsense. Now, there is some good news. This is from this morning's New York Times. And the New York Times, of course, is a very liberal, leftist newspaper. Now, you can read the New York Times. There's a technique to it. I read it. It's an important newspaper. And usually you'll find buried in the middle or towards the end the actual facts. The first part of it will be their opinions and that sort of thing. And then every now and then they'll put up a thing called news analysis. That means we're really telling you this time, we're giving you our opinion. We do it all the time, but this time we're actually going to tell you that this is our opinion. So they're very concerned about abortion and what's happening with abortion. And as you know, there's many states, Ohio, Alabama, Mississippi, Kansas, have put in heartbeat bills and that type of thing to tee things up to get back to the Supreme Court to try to get Roe versus Wade overturned. And this is causing a lot of consternation among people on the left. The head of Planned Parenthood, who replaced Cecile Richards 8 months ago, she was aborted this week from her position as head of Planned Parenthood. She was terminated early. Seems to be a bit of justice there. And they're trying to figure out what to do. But so this kind of shows places in the country where it's going to be hard to get an abortion. And they also have a chart that they put on, like, what happens when you're certain distance away from an abortion clinic. Because in some states, in Missouri, they're down to one clinic. And it's only being kept open. It's violating all kinds of health department rules, aside from the fact that they're killing people there. But it's violating health department rules, but courts are keeping it open because it's the only one. And they say that the further people live away from an abortion clinic, the less likely they are to get an abortion. And to me, this is a good thing. Yeah. I don't know if I said this last week, but there's a certain party in our country that wants open borders. They need open borders because they're killing the next generation of people that might actually turn out to believe the way they do. They're more likely to believe all the nonsense that they're taught. Another thing that's concerning in today's culture is privacy. This is from this morning's Sunday Review section of the New York Times. And New York Times is even concerned about it. I was telling someone yesterday I had to buy a new lawnmower. I was looking for a walk behind, and I went down to the local John Deere dealer because they carry Hondas, and that's what I had. But when I went in the wrong driveway, and I ended up in the middle of all their riding lawnmowers. All these beautiful zero-turn things, and they would cut my lawn in like 3.5 minutes and bankrupt me maybe. But so I turned around, went in, then I went in and looked at the lawnmowers. I was on my way home to another store. I checked my Facebook. there were ads appearing on my Facebook feed for riding lawnmowers, John Deere riding lawnmowers. So there's stuff like this, and we talk. We were talking about a family member who has a hearing issue, and did they get her hearing aids yet, and that type of thing. And the next day, I got a robocall. Hey, we understand that you're looking at hearing aids, and we know you're a senior. So privacy is an illusion. The things that they're doing, collecting data, you go to a store, you look at something, and you start getting ads. I mean, I know I'm not the greatest golfer in the world, but I must be really bad because I get tremendous number of video teaching tips for ads for golf instructional videos. This young lady, Kathy Zhu, was recently one of the beauty pageants. She's like 20 years old, Miss World America, I think, and she won. She's had her crown taken away now because of this tweet. Someone called me an Islamophobic for not wanting to put on a hijab. So she's not Muslim, and she said, I don't want to dress like a Muslim, so she's Islamophobic. Someone called me a racist because I recognize that black people kill more blacks than people do. In fact, there's an article in one of the major news magazines about this exactly, about what's going on in Chicago. Am I?
Yeah, you're going in and out.
Okay.
There you go.
It's a sensitive mic. My big nose gets in the way here. And anyway, what was I going to say? Oh, so now she's out as Miss World America because she is she's unacceptable. She's not politically correct. I think even worse, she might be a Trump supporter. And that's really sort of the death knell for anybody. So this week in Congress, Prager University, Senator Ted Cruz committee had the Google executives and some others in to defend the way they censor conservative views. Now the Google executives said, well, we don't really censor conservative views. Would it be helpful if I had that lapel mic instead? Oh, do you think I can get by without a mic?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, is that okay?
Yes.
Okay, so let me take this off, because I'll fiddle with that thing. I'm used to one where I can snort and it doesn't make any difference. So they had this guy, Dr. Robert Epstein. He's a researcher, used to be at San Diego State University. And he's examined, he said, listen, it'd be very simple for Google to just change a couple things in their algorithms and flip 16 million votes in the next election. Now we worry about everybody's, Russian collusion and that type of thing. I'm more concerned about the crazy fascist leftists that work at Google. And one of the things they've done, for example, the videos I put up are immediately put into restricted mode. The same mode that they would be put in if I was putting up pornography. So that somebody that has restricted mode enabled on their browser won't be able to find my videos. If you turn on restricted mode and you go search for John Haller or Prophecy Update, you won't find anything. Everything I've ever put up is put in restricted mode by Google. They didn't tell me they did it. I don't know how they did it. Another company that does this is the biggest YouTube channel in the world is Prager University. They're getting 1 billion views per year. The theory behind Prager University, Dennis Prager is a conservative Jewish individual. I highly recommend that you listen to him. He's not saved, pray for his salvation, but he is a very good thinker. And it's one show that I pay to podcast so I can listen to it every day. And so he started this thing called Prager University, and immediately, one of the big left-wing newspapers said, well, it's not really a university. You can't get a degree there. And it's like, we know that. We don't say you can get a degree. But he says, you give us 5 minutes. They put up a 5-minute video each week. You give us 5 minutes, and we'll give you a semester education that you won't get in a college. And they're getting 1 billion views, and most of their views go to people under the age of 35, which is very encouraging. And he's having an impact, so as a result, Google has put about 20% of his videos into restricted mode. One of those videos is about the birth of Israel, done by Alan Dershowitz himself, a left-leaning liberal lawyer. It's in restricted mode. They have 56 videos right now in restricted mode. The other one is the 10 Commandments. Dennis has just written a couple books, his commentary on the Torah. He did Exodus, now he's done Genesis, just came out. And again, he has a Orthodox Jewish perspective, but I find it interesting the way he looks at the scriptures. So here he is talking to Ted Cruz and a little bit about what's going on with him and Google when he gave testimony on Monday or Tuesday in Congress.
Mr. Prager, we'll start with you.
I will take just a moment, because my opening comment is under 5 minutes, just to respond on the issue of the Ten Commandments video that was placed on the restricted list by Google. The representative from Google mentioned that a reason that it would be on the restricted list was that it contains mentions of murder. So I was thinking I have a solution that will, I think, appeal to Google. I will re-release it as the 9 Commandments. That should solve the problem of including murder in my discussion of the 10 Commandments. And as regards the swastika, yes, there is a swastika. It is, again, in the commandment of do not murder, wherein I show that murder, there are people who believe murder is all right even today. And I use the swastika and the hammer and sickle as 2 examples. I would think we would want young people to associate the swastika with evil. That was why I had a swastika. My philosophy of life is easily summarized. God wants us to be good. Period. God without goodness is fanaticism, and goodness without God will not long endure. Everything I and PragerU do emanates from belief in the importance of being a good person. That some label us extreme or quote haters only reflects on the character and the broken moral compass of those making such accusations. They are the haters and extremists. PragerU releases a 5-minute video every week. Our presenters include 3 former prime ministers, 4 Pulitzer Prize winners, liberals, conservatives, gays, blacks, Latinos, atheists, believers, Jews, Christians, Muslims, and professors and scientists from MIT, Harvard, Stanford, and a dozen other universities. Do you think the Secretary General of NATO, or the former prime ministers of Norway, Canada, or Spain, or the late Charles Krauthammer, or Philip Hamburger, distinguished professor of law at Columbia Law School, would make a video for an extreme or hate-filled site? The idea is not only preposterous, it is a smear. Yet Google, which owns YouTube, has restricted access to 56 of our 320 5-minute videos and to other videos we produce. Restricted means families that have a filter to avoid pornography and violence cannot see that video. It also means that no school or library can show that video. Google has even restricted access to a video on the 10 Commandments, as we have seen. Yes, the 10 Commandments. We have repeatedly asked Google why our videos are restricted. No explanation is ever given. But of course we know why. Because they come from a conservative perspective. Liberals and conservatives differ on many issues, but they have always agreed that free speech must be preserved. While the left has never supported free speech, liberals always have. I therefore appeal to liberals to join us in fighting on behalf of America's crowning glory, free speech. Otherwise, I promise you, one day you will say, first they came after conservatives, and I said nothing. And then they came after me, and there was no one left to speak up for me. Thank you.
So a very powerful testimony that he gave. And then, during the Ten Commandments discussion, the senator from Hawaii, Hirono, I don't know why you elect these people. The Hawaiians need to repent, but I know their political orientation. They're very left-leaning, and she said, "Well, you have a swastika in the video, also." But it's like you understand. There's a thing called like context of what you're trying to show. So it's nonsensical. But there were internal Google emails, by the way, that referred to Dennis Prager, Ben Shapiro, and another conservative Jewish person as Nazis. We've really stepped through the looking glass. In Luke 17, Jesus said that in the end times it would be as the days of Lot and it would be as the days of Noah. And I look around what's going on with all these different things in the LGBTQ community and the activism and the things that they're shoving down our throats, frankly. And I think, I don't know that Lot had to put up with this. And it's one of the harbingers, I think, that indicates that we live at a time where God's just about ready to intervene and wrap this up. And listen, the attack on sexuality, on gender, goes to the core of creation, and it is demonic. It's not evil. It is demonically evil. It's of a different character. So the rest of the time today, I'm going to focus on the update part, a little bit on what's going on in the Middle East. Things are a bit chaotic over there. We know that the Bible is largely centered, Bible prophecy is largely centered on the geopolitics of the Middle East. And so the question always is, are we really close to the end? Is it just sort of close? And the answer is, I'm not sure. I just know that there are many things going on in the Middle East that could trigger a world war. If you go back to World War I, the Crown Prince of the Austro-Hungarian Empire was assassinated in 1914 in Sarajevo, in what eventually became Yugoslavia. That event, which you wouldn't think was a significant event, led to World War I, and millions of people being died, and really led to the continuation of that war in the Second World War, when even more millions of people died. And now the world seems to be lining up for another one. And the major powers of the world are confronting each other in the Middle East, largely through proxies. We have militias that we support, Russia has militias they support, and Iran has everything under the sun that's bad that they support. So let's just look at some of these. So it's interesting, this is my representation of Hezbollah. This is the Iranian flag on a rook chess piece with the Hezbollah flag sticking out of the top, because Hezbollah is controlled by Iran. You'll see in a few minutes there's some things that just came out in the last day or so from Hezbollah themselves. There was an exclusive interview in Daily Beast that's disturbing. But so Argentina, it was 25 years ago, 30 years ago, they had a bombing of Israeli embassy there. And finally, Argentina got around to designating Hezbollah as a terrorist group. Our government needs, I don't think we've designated them as a terrorist group yet, but I think it's something that needs to be done. This is from Geopolitical Futures. It's run by a guy named George Friedman. He's Jewish, secular Jewish, I believe, but he's a good thinker. He thinks through the issues and makes some good observations. When he was with Stratfor, for example, he had a great video up about the U.S. being sort of the inevitable empire. Why? Because of the way the U.S. is constructed geographically. We have our coasts are protected. We have relatively friendly people north and south. Our breadbasket has navigable rivers all the way from the breadbasket of the country, and that's the cheapest form of transportation in the world. And so it's no other country in the world is blessed with those physical qualities, geographical qualities. The Great Lakes, 20% of the fresh water in the world, and navigable waters to get. I don't know if any of you you can get navigable waters all the way from Minnesota to the Atlantic Ocean and then to the markets of the world. A few years ago, we drove out to Minneapolis, and we drove up to Duluth. It was shocking to me. I'd never been to Duluth. It's an enormous port in the middle of America on a lake, Lake Superior. Grain elevators and iron ore, and it was stunning to me. I had no idea. But this is an indication of America. So, in geopolitical futures this week, one of the little notes that they made about what's going on are Iranian visits to Lebanon and Syria. Listen to this. Hossein Amir Abdallahan, this guy named Hassan Amir, I call him Hossi for short, an aide to the president of the Iranian parliament, met with the Secretary General of Hezbollah and the Speaker of the Lebanese parliament on Friday in Beirut. They discussed Palestinians in Lebanon and regional developments, particularly those involving Israel. And the Palestinians in Lebanon, by the way, are very, very upset because they're being excluded now from the labor market. So every time you hear one of these Peace Now activists, these leftist activists, like I'm sure you will hear Congresswoman Tlaib and Congresswoman Omar this week when they go to, in the next week or two when they go to Israel, they'll tell, oh, look at how bad the Palestinians are. And I've been to, and you'll see in the second hour, I've been to Nablus, where a lot of the terrorists came from. I've seen the refugee camp in Nablus. But I've also been to Jordan, and I've seen the refugee camps there, where they are restricted, they're not allowed to vote, they are kept in these refugee camps, and they've been kept there for 70 years. They're worse than whatever is going on within the confines of Israel. And I sat next to a Palestinian activist. I went to this Christ at the Checkpoint conference in Oklahoma City back in October, and I asked him, it's really, these refugee camps are terrible. They're hellholes, that's what I said. He goes, oh, yes, they are. He grew up in Gaza. He's an oncologist now in Canada. And he lost children in an airstrike or a misdirected rocket, 3 daughters and a niece. And it was a big article in the New York Times about it. And I talked to him and I just said, so if I go to Jordan, I see the same type of refugee camps. Why do you never complain about Jordan? These people need to be confronted with these facts. You go to Damascus, Syria. Within the confines of Damascus, Syria is Yarmouk, which is a Palestinian refugee camp. And roughly a square mile, 300,000 people live. It's empty now because of the Syrian civil war. It's been pulverized to smithereens. Have you heard one of these activists that complain about Israel's treatment of the Palestinians say one word about Syria, one word about Jordan, and now it's happening in Lebanon? So anyway, so this Hossein Amir goes to Beirut. It says, on the same day as the Beirut meetings, the commander of the Iranian army's ground forces said the resistance front, which is comprised of Iranian forces and regional partners like pro-Assad Syrian forces and Hezbollah fighters, would retaliate against Israel for its attacks in Syria. Such meetings and bellicose rhetoric from Iran are to be expected, but these developments come as Israel has made similar threats against Iran and built up its military forces for a confrontation with Hezbollah. Given that one of our forecasts early in the year was that Israel would attack Hezbollah in 2019, we're taking note. And this is a screenshot from what they predicted, geopolitical futures predicted would happen in 2019. Israel will attack Hezbollah in Lebanon, and that's because Hezbollah has developed better missile capabilities, somewhere on the order of 150,000 rockets. Many of them are precision guided, and they're increasing that. That's why Israel's attacking Iranian installations in Syria where they're manufacturing guidance systems and that sort of things. But you can see that the rockets, they have around 10,000 rockets that could reach Ben Gurion Airport. Ben Gurion Airport's really the only airport in Israel, and you shut down Ben Gurion, you begin to shut down Israel. I was, when we were there 2 years ago, we had some friends with, we had lunch with them, and let's see here. So they're, see Haifa here? They live about 6 miles south of the Lebanon border in a little town called Nahariya. And they said, listen, if they start firing missiles, we don't even have time to get to a bomb shelter, and we're toast. And this is the feeling of people all across the Galilee and the northern part of Israel. This is from the Daily Beast. This just published on the 19th. As Iran-U.S. tensions rise, Hezbollah readies for war with Israel. Here in Lebanon, Hezbollah's commanders are close allies and clients of Iran, and they are targeted by U.S. sanctions as well. They warn that if the pressure, this is from the Daily Beast article, that if the pressure continues, these rugged hills where the party of God, that's what Hezbollah means, fought bloody guerrilla campaigns to end 15 years of Israeli occupation in 2000 and repel an Israeli invasion in 2006, could erupt once again. And this time, they say the combat will be far more devastating. Hezbollah's forces, battle-hardened in the Syrian civil war, have begun redeploying toward the Israeli border. Now look, we all know Ezekiel 38 and 39. It talks about a war on the mountains of Israel. This is, now, are we on the verge? You know, is Ezekiel 38, 39 happening tomorrow? I think not, but what you see is all the chess pieces on the chessboard are being moved into the place. I don't think, when I read Ezekiel 38 and 39, for example, it says, a great company and a mighty army. Now, does it mean a lot of people, or does it mean like a lot of missiles? I don't know the answer to that. But they're saying the sanctions now, this one person is quoted as saying, have us preparing for dealing with the Israeli front. The Hezbollah officer in charge of 800 fighters on Lebanon's border with Israel said. He declines to use his real name because he is not authorized to speak to the media. We will fire the first shot this time, he said. And I can take you back to the Herzliya conference 2 years ago, where the then head of the Israeli Air Force gave a speech. It was in Hebrew, but it's translated. It's up on the internet. I've played it a couple times. And he said, we're ready for this. We've been preparing for this. And the war in Lebanon lasted for 6 weeks, 37 days. We will accomplish far more this time. And he used the terms essentially shock and awe like you've never seen before. And we will accomplish in 48 to 60 hours what took us 5 weeks to do in 2006. Now, what does that mean exactly? I don't know, but I'm telling you that everybody in the region is preparing for war. And now you have Hezbollah people coming out publicly and saying, we're ready for war. The pressure may actually be consolidating and motivating Iran's proxies. We've put a lot of pressure, economic sanctions on Iran. Because of those sanctions on Iran, they have trouble funding Hezbollah. Hezbollah is looking for money. So what do people who are in dire economic straits, what do? They sometimes, the regimes in charge, will foment war because they don't really care about the people that would have to fight the war. And so I think, you know, when are we going to go past the tipping point with what's going on in the dire straits of the economics in Lebanon, the dire straits of the Strait of Hormuz, and those type of things? So this will be, it's something that we need to watch. The article continues, Hezbollah is still fighting in Syria while training Iranian allied militias in Iraq and Yemen. The commander says his organization and Iran have moved past their split with the Palestinian allies over Syria, where they were on opposite sides of the Syrian revolution as it turned into a bloody regional proxy war, And Iran is once again providing training and support for Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. That's no surprise. One of the Hezbollah people said this: "Our wish before the war in Syria was to open a front in the Golan, but the Syrian government set a red line. Now there are no red lines." The commander acknowledges a new war would bring vast devastation to Israel and Lebanon, but says the sanctions crippling the Iranian economy and forcing a large reduction in Iran's financial support for Hezbollah could make this nightmare scenario real. We'll see. In the Jerusalem Post on Friday, Jonathan Spire, who's I think one of the best journalists covering things in the Middle East, he was just over in the Kurdish areas of Iraq with a friend of mine, the Syrian sideshow, with regional forces focus elsewhere, violence in the country grinds on. I would highly recommend that you get it. Just go to jpost.com, type in Jonathan Spire, and you'll find a number of very excellent articles. And he notes that, everybody thinks Assad won, but the war goes on in Syria. They have problems in Idlib. It's just things are not going well. Far from entering a phase of post-conflict reconstruction and renewed centralized governance, Syria today is a patchwork of different areas of control. It is also thoroughly penetrated by a variety of regional and global players. Indeed, Syria today forms a fascinating microcosm of the larger regional Cold War underway. It is a space in which all the main players in this contest, the Iran-led bloc, Russia, the U.S. and its allies, and the Turkey-Qatar Sunni Islamist axis have a stake. But while the violence continues, the main competition today is political. The enclaves appear set to continue in existence for the foreseeable future, with their lines fairly stable. The most important flashpoints in the regional Cold War have moved elsewhere, and he means over to the Persian Gulf. The bigger picture is one in which the international backers of the various enclaves have a greater say in the direction of events than do their Syrian clients. Direct tensions are now rising between the U.S. and Iran. The center of attention is the Gulf waterways. Iraq is a secondary point of friction. Syria, where a kind of proxy conflict between the U.S., Iran, and other forces has played out in recent years, is for the moment no longer the focus of attention. Its ruined landscape is divided up between competing regional blocs, each in turn making use of local players. Along the central arena, it is now a slideshow. And this map has been fairly stable now for almost a year, showing the different regional controls. You have the Turkish areas in Al-Qaeda there in the north and Idlib province. A lot of bombing going on there, hundreds of people being killed each week. U.S. controls this area down here in the middle. Of course, this is the Golan Heights down here south of Damascus. And there's still some Islamic State area of influence that is happening. So Syria still remains a very volatile place. Population at the beginning of the Syrian civil war in 2011 was 23 million. Today, 17 million is the highest estimate that I found. What happened to those 6 million people? Well, I have a video, I didn't put it in my presentation, from the former head of NATO forces in Europe, and he testified in front of Congress probably 5 years ago, and he said, Syria and Russia went in and barrel bombed the cities, the Sunni areas, to get the people on the road. And they ended up in Europe, and now they're Europe's problem. So they got a twofer. They got the Sunnis out like they wanted. They're moving Iranian Shiites and others Shiites in to replace them. And they were able to destabilize Europe to a pretty great degree. So that was General Breedlove, I believe was his name. This is from the Arab News yesterday, showing the problems of entering into an alliance with Iran. You might have a handshake, but you better count the needles from the poisonous cactus that you just shook hands with. So this is another control map of Syria. there's a lot of what's going to happen. Here's an interesting article. This is an editorial in the Arab News Friday. Why Assad is burning crops. Now, we're facing some major crop problems here in the United States this year. I think I mentioned beforehand to some of you that over 12 million acres were not even planted in the United States. That has an impact on people who run grain elevators, who do trucking, who do barge traffic, who make food, and that sort of thing. My advice is, buy some extra food when you go to the store, and don't go crazy, but it would be best to have some things on hand. But this is what's going on. Well, in Syria, they had a couple of bread baskets. One bread basket was in this area, which is now controlled by Kurdish forces in the north. Another bread basket was Idlib. Now, Idlib is currently under control of Al-Qaeda. When the war started actually down here at Dara, and when they do what they've done in the Middle East for a long time. Like when the Assyrians took over Israel, they didn't leave the Jews there. They deported them. And this is exactly what Assad has done. So the people in Dara who were the rebels that they didn't kill, they allowed them to move up to Idlib. Because the thought is, we move them several hundred miles, they won't have the structures and support and things that they do. And we'll get them in a place where we can kill them later. This is what the Assad regime is doing. So what's happening now is that the Assad regime is going in with Russian support and burning the fields where crops are growing in Idlib province. So we won't bomb the people this time, we'll just starve them to death. And this is really, it was a drought that led to the Syrian civil war uprising back in 2011. This area here along the Euphrates River had a massive drought for a number of years, and it affected food prices, and people that don't have food get angry when they can't get food, and that led to the Syrian civil war. So he's doing this, and it says here, previous starvation sieges in other areas of the country, this is talking about Syria, have not sped up the end of hostilities. The rather more likely explanation for why Assad is doing this is that the goal of Damascus is something more akin to population cleansing. By starving the rebelling populations, it likely initially aims to sap them of their capacity to fight and resist, but this tactic dovetails with a greater strategic goal of pushing opposition-inclined populations out of the country and across the border into Turkey. Turkey already has probably 3.5 million refugees. It's taxing the resources of Jordan, which is probably the most water-starved country on the planet. Indeed, some authorities in Turkey are no longer treating the Syrian refugee problem as a temporary one, but rather administering the crisis with an understanding that the new demographic situation is likely permanent. But even Turkey cannot be looking forward to having to absorb another million or so refugees from Idlib on top of the 3.5 million it already cares for. Yet, just like the Assad regime cannot do much about Turkey's incursion south of the border into Syria, the Turkish government cannot do much to prevent the starvation tactics of Damascus and Idlib. So you see, this is what's going on in Syria is kind of a microcosm. It's a proxy war being fought by all the major powers of the world. It's very tumultuous. And could this be an area where it triggers a world war? I'm saying when I look around, I see multiple triggers all over the world. And this is what, it's Jesus said, there'll be wars and rumors of wars. At the Hezbollah conference, a security conference that takes place in Israel each year, it's online, you can find it on YouTube. This was the title slide of one of the panels, the Middle East. And this is where I got the idea for my title last week. The writing is on the wall. It's interesting that they use a biblical reference when the king of Babylon saw the writing on the wall. And it says, his knees smote together and he sort of lost control of bodily functions. Let's just put it this way. And but this is what they were talking about at the security conference with former heads of the Mossad, Brett McGurk, who was one of the advisors for our government, and they all said, something's going on, and it seems like war is coming, and it's inevitable. The Institute for the Study of War has a new publication out called ISIS Second Comeback. Look at just a couple quotes from that. As of June 2019, ISIS likely has the capability to seize another major urban center in Iraq or Syria. It has chosen instead to pursue political and security conditions that will enable it to seize and hold larger and potentially more enduring pieces of territory in the future. And one of the problems is when we went in there, this is part of the problem with the Palestinian-Israeli issue. Israel never achieved total victory in any of its wars. And I think Daniel Pipes and others says, you don't make peace with people who still think they have a chance. You have to not annihilate them, but you have to beat them into submission. Then you can make peace. And that's never happened. So, and this is part of the problem with the U.S., we've not really won wars that we've gone into recently. And the good people fighting them for us, but so this thing from Institute for the Study of War says the U.S. must therefore defeat ISIS by eliminating its physical means to fight. ISIS is composed of many local armed elements that pledge allegiance to it. One approach to eliminating ISIS physical means is to disaggregate the ISIS military force and then work with local partners to defeat the component parts. I think that's a bit of a fantasy. And so this is a picture from an ISIS website showing all the terror attacks that they've been able to achieve. And you see things in the picture like Eiffel Tower, Big Ben, other places that should be easily recognizable. See the Eiffel Tower here, Big Ben, Notre Dame Cathedral. I didn't put that up there. This is from the ISIS website. And the discussion took place. I'm not going to play this clip, but
now ISIS takes advantage of all of this. I think ISIS takes advantage of mayhem and maelstroms and vacuums. And I am particularly concerned. I think we did a good job at taking down the physical caliphate. That was far from a foregone conclusion. But we have to remain invested in that. And if we take our eye off that ball, they will be able to resurge. In Syria, just 30 seconds on this almost, but in Syria, obviously, I think we had a very good campaign plan, very limited U.S. investments, special forces. We were able to do things 4 or 5 years ago we could not have done 10 years ago. And with about 2,000 U.S. forces, defeated the physical caliphate, brought some real stability to northeast Syria, which gave us some real leverage in the overall Syria conflict. We're now reducing those forces. We've announced to the world that we don't have any intention to stay in Syria. President Trump announced that. I think that was quite damaging. So I think ISIS is kind of looking for ways to take advantage. I do not, though, share the view that they're going to come back like they did in 2014.
Okay, so he would disagree with this. I think they're going to continue to be a problem. And there are places like a friend of mine went to the Kurdish area of Iraq, and they weren't able to get into Mosul because it's still so unstable. And this is a picture. This is the great mosque of Mosul after ISIS got finished with it. And so interesting charts in that article about ISIS, about some of the capabilities that ISIS has that even Al-Qaeda in Iraq never had. They have more money, they have more equipment, that sort of thing. And so I think they make a pretty good case that there are some of their things, the only thing that's been degraded is their political governance, the areas that they actually control. Otherwise, they're still fairly intact, and it's concerning. So this week there were a bunch of other things in the Middle East. I'll just go over these kind of quickly. The U.S. downed an Iranian drone. The Iranians responded, wasn't our drone. I don't know what drone you're talking about. Maybe you shot down your own drone. So what you learn is that somebody's not telling us the truth. And so did we shoot down a drone or did we not shoot down a drone? Did we shoot down our own drone? If you believe the Iranians, you're going to say, well, we're perfect and fine. We don't do anything wrong. The U.S. is bad. They're here to just cause trouble. There was a in the Straits of Gibraltar, Britain seized an oil tanker a couple weeks ago that was headed to Syria. Iran has retaliated. They've interfered with shipping. Another thing that this is from an English published, it's published in England in Arabic magazine. We were in London, by the way, last November. Within the few blocks of our hotel, almost every restaurant was Middle Eastern. Lebanese, Pakistani, Iranian, Turkish, Iraqi. I didn't even know Iraqi was like a food group or whatever. Our hotel, we had 50 channels on the cable. 9 of the channels were in Arabic. We were 3 blocks from Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park. 20% of the channels in our hotel were Arabic language. Process that. So things are changing. I saw Katie Hoppins tweeted yesterday that the many police in London believe they've lost control of the streets. There's stabbings that take place all over the place. So this report, of course, there's a report about the taking of the British tanker. I'll talk about that in a moment. But other things that are reported in this newspaper are that Lebanese, Hezbollah, and IRGC members were killed in a raid by drones of an unknown origin on a base in western Salah ad-Din province in Iraq. The base, according to Sheikh Thar al-Bayadi, head of the Council of Arab Tribes in Iraq, contained ballistic missiles recently transported by Iran to the site. So Iran is building up missiles in Iraq. And so somebody sent drones in there. They don't know who. It's kind of easy to guess, but was it the Iranians? Okay, we can do a process of elimination. And so this is a big problem. Gatestone Institute has an article today. Jonathan Spires written on it recently about Iran's Trojan army faces challenges in Iraq. But what Iran is doing is they're essentially trying to create the Shiite militias as part of the Iraqi security forces, which means they needed access to United States intelligence and other information. And Iran they're very clever at doing this, and they have their guys on the ground and they're getting the Shiite militias on their side. This is the mosque this is Tikrit, I believe. This is the mosque of Imam Ali, who was the founder of the Shiite sect of Islam. It's a huge complex. But this is the province where this drone attack occurred. So now we have all these reports about Iran taking over this British tanker. There were a couple other ships that went off the, I don't know if you know this, if you go to, I think it's called marinetraffic.com, we can track every airplane, you can track every ship in the world pretty much that has a transponder on it. It's unbelievable the information you can get. And you can find out where U.S. forces and ships and that type of thing are by these websites. But they turn off the transponders and the ship just disappears. And the Persian Gulf is pretty big. You know, we look at it on a map and it doesn't look like it's all that large, but it's quite large. It's open ocean. And so these ships have been disappearing. Well, Iran has said, yeah, you took our ship, we take your ship. And everybody's looking at this as an escalation. So in addition to the ship in the lower right-hand corner, the ship in the upper left-hand corner was also detained for a time. I think it was eventually released. So this is, I mean, you look at any newspaper world, this is the Arabic language newspaper from England, talking about, what's going on in the Straits of Hormuz and where the ship is. One of the people I follow on Twitter is Intel Crab. He usually has pretty good information. So let me take a few minutes to talk about one particular issue. And this is kind of a pet issue to me because I think it's very important with the way that it fits into Bible prophecy, because I think it fits into the convergence of events and why things are more likely to happen now than they are sometime in the future, and that's demographics. So this is an article from the next to last issue of Foreign Affairs. With great demographics comes great power. And what you find is that a lot of the cultures of the world have demographic problems. The most rapidly aging country on the planet is, guess what? Iran. Another one, well, of course, Japan is on the decline. I've often cited this statistic. They sell more adult diapers in Japan than they do children diapers. And the same thing is happening in China because of one-child policies and everything. They could, let me pull up this article here. Population decline does not preclude improvements in living standards, but is a drag on relative economic and military power. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, the United States working age population is set to grow by about 10% between 2015 and 2040. Over the same period, Germany and South Korea's working age populations are expected to shrink by 20%. Process that. Old people, I can testify to you, having been in the hospital twice this year, old people, I think I qualify as one, require more medical care. They're a bigger drain on the economy, and this is very concerning. Japan, in the same period, their working age population will decline by 22%. This is not sustainable. The number of young men aged 15 to 24, a group from which military manpower is typically drawn, is projected to increase over that period by 3% in the United States, but fall by 23% in Germany, 25% in Japan, and 40% in South Korea. So what's Kim got to do? Baby Kim? He just has to wait. He'll win in time if his people keep producing. China's even worse. Some countries are growing. Africa is exploding. By 2040, the Philippines population could reach 140 million, which would be larger than Russia's population today. In 2015, China had almost 4 times as many people aged 20 to 39 as Indonesia and the Philippines did combined. But by 2040, it is projected to only have twice as many. You see how rapidly that's changing? And the over 65 population in China right now is about 100 million. Within 25 years, it's projected to be 350 million. I do know this. Old people don't fight wars. But this is why it's one of these convergence things that I think we need to look at. And I think it plays into Bible prophecy. So Iran, yeah, they have people for an army now, but will they have people for an army in 20 years? And if their goal is to get rid of Israel, when are they going to try to do this? They're going to do it and listen, the leaders of all these countries know exactly what's going on. It's happening. In fact, there's another article toward an ever closer European Union at Geopolitical Futures this week that discusses similar things. European obsolescence. Well, Europe is trying to reconstitute itself and hold itself together, but look at this. A recent PricewaterhouseCoopers study projected that by 2050, there will not be a single EU country in the G7, the largest 7 economies in the world. Not one. Already in terms of population, no EU country is in the world's top 15. Germany is 17th with a population of roughly 83 million, which is roughly the population of Iran and Turkey. Iran and Turkey each have that. It is hard to overstate the novelty of this reversal. Now, however, as a result of external challenges like the United States trade wars, China's Belt and Road Initiative, Russia's renewed assertiveness in its borderlands, an increasingly independent and powerful Turkey, In a rapidly changing demographic profile, the interests of EU countries are converging. The problem is, he concludes, is that their design is obsolete. So look, I'm not of the view, and I know it's very popular in Bible prophecy circles, about a European-based revived Roman Empire. I have two comments to that. It could happen, but if it doesn't happen soon, it might not happen. I guess there's three comments. The third comment is, if it doesn't happen soon, with the growth of population and the birth rates of Muslims that have immigrated to Europe, it's going to be an Islamic European Union anyway. So deal with that. That's why I'm not dismissive of the idea that it could be an Islamic Antichrist. I'm not dogmatic on that particular point, but I also believe that there are logistics and demographics that are at play in our world that are very unique to human history. These are things that have never happened before in human history. And it's very often ignored, but I've been talking about this for years. The Economist magazine did 3 or 4 years ago, did a big series on demographics, and the numbers were shocking. Now age has been sort of distributed in a bell curve, kind of rises up to the middle. What's happening is it's now like a beehive instead of a bell. And it's flattening out, and it's flattening out in areas that are not, where people are not productive in the way that they produce things. Look at this. Europe's most powerful leaders, Emmanuel Macron and Merkel, know this. It is a strange irony that the two countries that arguably played the biggest role in destroying Europe in the 20th century and for whom the EU is supposed to function as a de facto cage now must work together to save it. The new European Union Commission president comes out of Germany. There's also a continuing, he notes, the refugee crisis continues in Europe. Go to Secure Freedom Radio and listen to the interview that Frank Gaffney did, I think it was Friday, with Ami Horowitz, where he talks about what's going on in Sweden. The statistics were showing in Sweden that these immigrants from the Middle East, you can guess what religion they are, the rape statistics were spiking. Suddenly, there were no rapes by people of immigrants. It was a miracle. Or it was a very clever ruse by the Swedish government to hide the facts of what were going on, and they just stopped tracking those statistics. Yes. That's exactly what happened. And Ami did a very good thing about it. So I think I'm near the end of this. So this thing going on in the Middle East, Iran's miscalculation, again, George Friedman talks about the fact that Iran is kind of in a box. It's kind of in a cage almost, and it's fighting to get out. And part of that has to do with, of course, we've increased our oil production. And you see here the Straits of Hormuz is still where the largest percentage of oil passes through there on a daily basis, next to the Straits of Malta and the Cape of Good Hope. But U.S. production is up. We don't really need Iranian oil anymore. But yet, even though the country like Japan and other countries in China are dependent on Iranian oil, they're not doing anything to stop Iran from messing with the shipping lanes in the Strait of Hormuz. So the U.S. is sort of left to play the policeman. And how this goes, I don't know. So all over the newspapers this week was this seizure of the UK-linked tanker. These are the headlines from this morning's papers. Tension mounts as Iran seizes 2 British tankers. Tehran Times said Iran stops UK tanker after it hits boat and ignores distress call. Oh yeah, U.S. shot down their own drone too, by the way. And if you believe that, I have a tanker to sell you, I guess. Here's a satellite shot today of, you see the tanker here in the photograph. This is Iran, a port in Iran. So Iran's miscalculation, George Friedman says this, but one critical thing has changed since the Gulf oil crisis of prior years. Key U.S. allies depended heavily on oil from the Middle East in the 1980s. Turkey sourced 78% of its oil from the region. France 24%, UK 10%. In 2018, those numbers were far lower. Turkey 7%, France 4%, and UK 0%. And so Iran's looking at that and say, wait, we're getting hammered by the U.S. sanctions. Our economy is falling apart. Hezbollah is complaining that they're not getting the money they want. Islamic Jihad is probably complaining in back chambers. So it says this, Tehran is desperately searching for leverage it can use to force the U.S. to ease the economic pressure on Iran. Breaking uranium enrichment restrictions laid out in the Iran nuclear deal has not done the trick. So now Iran is trying to show the U.S. and the world that if it cannot catch a break, it will try to send the price of oil skyrocketing by blocking traffic out of the Persian Gulf. So this is a situation. And then one more thing. Yesterday, Benjamin Netanyahu passed David Ben-Gurion as the longest-serving prime minister in Israel's 72-year history. And who knows what's going to happen with the elections in September, or if there are even going to be elections in September. And part of the problem with all this stuff going on in the Middle East with the UK tanker, what's the UK doing? How are they responding? They're not really doing anything. Why? Because they're in the midst of a political crisis too. Everywhere you look, there's these political crises. And Jesus said, you know, there would be wars and rumors of wars, but the end is not yet. And then there would be earthquakes in diverse places. Does it seem like the earthquakes are increasing? You read about them all the time. Now listen, this is not a time for Christians to be fearful. You should be able to look at these things and say, listen, this should show you that your hope is not in stuff, in geopolitical security. The church, I can tell you from friends who have gone to the Kurdish areas of Iraq, the church is growing. Muslim imams, lifelong Muslims, are coming to faith in Jesus Christ by the dozens and by the hundreds, by the thousands. I had a video of a church in Iraq. It was very interesting. It was a room probably about this size. It was a storefront. You had a couple guys sitting over in the corner at the computer running the PowerPoint for the worship songs. And these people go there knowing they could be killed for their faith.
The cross in the window.
There's a flashing neon cross in the window. In a dark, outside it's pitch black, and all you see is this flashing cross. So it's a time for Christians to get ready to meet the King. That's what we believe. Amen. Let's pray.